The smell of frying bacon and stale coffee hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of disinfectant that the busboy had just mopped over the linoleum floors. It was Tuesday afternoon, which meant the diner was caught in that strange lull between the lunch rush and the early dinner crowd. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long, dusty beams of light across the red vinyl booths, illuminating the floating particles of grease that seemed permanent in the atmosphere. Anna moved through the dining room like she was on autopilot. Her feet ached in a way that no amount of cheap insoles could fix, a dull throb that started in her heels and shot all the way up to her lower back. She was 25, though she felt much older on days like this. She carried a heavy gray bus tub filled with dirty dishes balanced on her left hip, her right hand clutching a pot of decaf coffee. She navigated the tight spaces between tables without looking, knowing exactly how many inches of clearance she had before she bumped into a chair. She dropped the tub off in the window for the dishwashers and grabbed a rag to wipe down table 4. It was a sticky mess of syrup and crumbs. She scrubbed hard, her mind miles away. She was thinking about the stack of bills on her kitchen counter, the electric bill, the rent, the payment for her phone. The tips in her apron pocket felt light, just a jingle of coins and a few crumpled dollar bills that wasn't going to make much of a dent in anything. In the corner of the restaurant, sitting alone at a large round table, sat Mr. Harrison. He was a regular, but certainly not a favorite among the staff. He was a man who wore expensive suits that looked somehow uncomfortable on him, like he was wearing a costume to play the role of a wealthy businessman. He was loud, often speaking on his phone about important deals and stock prices, usually just to make sure everyone else in the diner could hear him. Today, he was in a particularly foul mood. He had sent his soup back twice, claiming it wasn't hot enough, and had spent the last 20 minutes complaining to anyone who would listen about the service. He thrived on discomfort. He liked making people feel small. It was how he measured his own importance, by how much he could get someone to scramble just to please him. Anna had done her best to stay invisible. She knew his type. If she didn't make eye contact, maybe he would just eat his sandwich and leave. But as she wiped down the counter near the register, she felt his eyes on her. He had been talking to the manager earlier, a sleazy little man who would do anything to keep a big spender happy. They had been whispering and glancing over in her direction. Anna felt a knot form in her stomach. She hated being the topic of conversation. She tried to busy herself refilling the salt shakers, but she could feel him beckoning. It wasn't a polite wave. It was a crooked finger, a sharp gesture of command. She hesitated for a second, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She pasted on her customer service face the one that didn't show the frustration underneath and walked over to his table. "Yes, sir," she asked, her voice tired but polite. "Is everything all right with the order now?" Mr. Harrison took a slow sip of his iced tea, the ice clinking loudly against the glass. He didn't answer her immediately. He looked her up and down, taking in the stained apron and the messy hair tied back in a bun. He smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile a predator gives to prey before it pounces. "The food is tolerable," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I am bored, Anna. I am very bored waiting for my associates." "I'm sorry to hear that, sir," she said, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Can I get you another refill or maybe a slice of pie?" "No, no," he dismissed her offer with a wave of his hand. "I don't want food. I want entertainment." He leaned back in his chair, draping his arm over the empty seat next to him. "I was speaking to your manager. He tells me you have a hidden talent." He says you used to be quite the little performer. Anna froze. The rag in her hand felt suddenly heavy. She knew exactly what he was talking about. She had made the mistake of mentioning her past to a co-worker once during a late-night shift, venting about how hard it was to give up on her dream. She never thought it would get back to a customer, especially not this one. I don't know what he told you, Anna stammered, her heart beginning to beat faster. I just work here. Oh, come now, Mr. Harrison pressed, his voice rising slightly so that the tables nearby could hear. Don't be modest. He tells me you are a pianist. A real prodigy, or so you thought. The couple at the next table stopped eating. The conversation in the booth behind them quieted down. Anna could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. She looked at the exit, counting the steps it would take to get out the door, but she couldn't leave. She needed this job. She needed the paycheck. I play a little, she admitted quietly, hoping he would just let it go. A little. Mr. Harrison laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Well, we have a perfectly good piano sitting right there in the corner. It's gathering dust. It's a shame, really. He pointed a thick finger toward the instrument against the far wall. It was an old upright, painted black, currently holding a vase of plastic flowers and a stack of laminated menus. Anna looked at the piano. She hadn't touched a keyboard in almost 2 years. Not since she realized that talent wasn't always enough to pay the bills in a city full of talented people. Not since she sold her own keyboard to pay for a car repair so she could get to this very job. Please, sir, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I have tables to clean. Nonsense, he snapped. The cleaning can wait. I am a paying customer, and I am requesting a song. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Or are you telling me you aren't actually any good? Was the manager lying to me? Were you lying to him? It was a trap. Anna could see it clearly. If she refused, she was being rude to a customer and could get fired. If she played and was terrible because she was rusty, he would laugh at her and humiliate her. And if she played well, he would probably still find a way to make it feel cheap. He wanted to reduce her to a carnival act, a dancing monkey he could command for his own amusement. He wanted to remind her that no matter what she used to be, now she was just the girl who brought him coffee. The air in the diner felt thick and suffocating. The clinking of silverware seemed to stop entirely as the entire room waited for her response. Mr. Harrison sat there with a smug look on his face, sure that he had backed her into a corner. He expected her to blush, to stammer, and eventually to run away to the kitchen in tears. Anna looked at the cheap linoleum floor, then back at the man who was trying to break her spirit. She thought about the long nights she spent practicing scales until her fingers bled. She thought about the scholarship she lost and the auditions that went nowhere. She thought about how much she hated feeling small. She straightened her back. She didn't smile. She slowly took the notepad out of her apron pocket and set it on the table. If that is what you want, she said, her voice steady and surprisingly calm. She turned away from him and walked toward the piano. She could feel every eye in the room on her back. She could feel Mr. Harrison's gaze burning into her, waiting for her to fail. She reached the corner of the diner and stood before the instrument. It looked sad sitting there under the fluorescent lights, covered in dust and neglected. With a sigh, Anna reached out and moved the plastic vase of flowers to the floor. She sat down on the small, rickety wooden bench. It wobbled slightly under her weight. She stared at the keys. They were yellowed with age, some chipped, and they stuck out like broken teeth. It was a far cry from the grand pianos she used to play in the university hall. This was a beast that hadn't been loved in a long time. Behind her, she heard the scrape of a chair as Mr. Harrison turned to better watch the show. She heard him chuckle to the table next to him. "Let's see if she remembers middle C," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. Anna closed her eyes for a moment. She took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of bacon and coffee, grounding herself in the reality of where she was. She wasn't playing for a panel of judges anymore. She wasn't playing for a grade. She was playing to survive a moment of cruelty. She placed her hands on the keys. The plastic felt cool and foreign. She didn't start with a simple song. She didn't play Chopsticks or Heart and Soul. She didn't give him the satisfaction of testing the waters. Instead, she let her hands drop into a position she had known for 20 years. She was ready. She was going to show him exactly what a little meant. She pressed down on the keys, and the sound that came out was not the timid plinking of a hobbyist, but a thunderous chord that silenced the room instantly. The backfire was about to begin. The first chord hung in the air like a heavy cloud, instantly silencing the clatter of silverware against ceramic plates. It wasn't a polite note, it was a declaration. Anna's fingers didn't tremble. They didn't fumble for the right keys. Instead, they settled into the opening of a piece that was deceptively simple but incredibly difficult to play with emotion. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a song that felt less like music and more like breathing. For a split second, the only sound in the entire diner was the hum of the refrigerators and the distant hiss of the grill. Then, the melody began to weave its way through the room. It started soft, a gentle, rolling wave of sound that seemed to wash away the smell of fried food and the tension of the afternoon. Mr. Harrison had been leaning back in his chair, a smirk plastered on his face, ready to snicker at a wrong note or a hesitant rhythm. But as the music continued, his smirk faltered. He took a sip of his tea, but the glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He was waiting for the crash. He was waiting for the moment where the waitress would forget herself and revert to an amateur. But that moment didn't come. Anna sat on the wobbling bench, her back straight, her eyes closed. She wasn't in the diner anymore. In her mind, she was back in her small apartment, sitting at the keyboard she had to sell. She was remembering the feeling of the sun on her face during the last recital she ever played. She poured every ounce of that memory into the old, yellowing keys. The piano, which usually sounded tinny and harsh when banged on by customers or the occasional brave child, seemed to wake up under her touch. The dusty wood vibrated against her back, and the sound was surprisingly full, echoing off the tiled walls. She played the opening section with a tenderness that made the air feel heavy. Her left hand moved in a steady, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat, while her right hand danced over the higher notes, creating a melody that was achingly beautiful. It was a sound that demanded to be listened to. It was impossible to ignore. The reaction in the room started with the table nearest to the piano. A young man in a hoodie, who had been staring at his phone since he sat down, slowly lowered the device. His expression changed from bored indifference to curiosity, and then to genuine focus. He stopped chewing his sandwich, just listening. Beside him, an elderly woman who had been stirring her coffee absent-mindedly froze. Her spoon clinked against the saucer, and she turned her head toward the corner of the room. The spell spread outward like a ripple in a pond. The two business women who were arguing about a contract in the booth fell silent. One of them gestured toward the piano, her eyes wide. The manager, who had been nervously wiping the counter near the register, stopped moving entirely. He knew Anna could play, she had told him during her interview, but he had never actually heard her. He had no idea she possessed this kind of power. He looked from the piano to Mr. Harrison, a worried look on his face, realizing he might have misjudged the situation. Mr. Harrison, however, was not pleased with the silence. He had wanted a spectacle, but this was the wrong kind. He wanted to be the center of attention, the one controlling the narrative, but now, nobody was looking at him. He was just an audience member, and that was a role he despised. He shifted in his seat, clearing his throat loudly. The sound was jarring and rude, cutting through the delicate music like a jagged knife. He expected Anna to flinch. He expected her to stop, apologize, and look over at him with fear in her eyes. But she didn't. She didn't even open her eyes. She just kept playing. In fact, as if responding to his rudeness, the music changed. The piece moved into a more complex, emotional section. The rhythm became slightly faster, the notes tumbling over one another with a frantic energy. Anna's fingers flew across the keyboard, blurring with motion. The sound swelled, filling every corner of the diner. It wasn't just background noise anymore, it was a living, breathing thing that commanded respect. It was fierce. It was unapologetic. Mr. Harrison set his glass down with a hard thud, trying to assert his dominance. He looked around the room, glaring at the other customers, as if angry that they were listening to the waitress instead of paying attention to him. But he couldn't compete with the sound. The music was bigger than he was. It was more real than his expensive suit or his heavy gold watch. The contrast was stark. Here was a man who spent his life trying to make himself feel big by making others feel small, and there was a woman in a stained apron who was effortlessly filling the room with beauty. The more he tried to ignore it, the more the music seemed to seep into him. Despite himself, he felt a strange tightness in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time: inadequacy. Not just inadequacy in his musical knowledge, but in his character. He looked at the patrons who were now fully turned toward the piano, their faces soft with enjoyment. He realized he was the only one in the room who wasn't moved. He was the only one who was trying to fight against the current. Anna reached the climax of the piece. Her hands moved in wide, sweeping arcs, striking the keys with a controlled intensity that made the old piano shudder. She didn't care about her fingers, which were starting to cramp slightly from the unaccustomed exertion. She didn't care about the time. She was thinking about every person who had ever looked down on her, every time she had been told she wasn't good enough, every rejection letter she had opened. She poured all that frustration into the music, turning it into something pure and undeniable. The tension in the room was palpable. It was no longer just a diner, it was a concert hall. A group of teenagers in the back, usually loud and obnoxious, were leaning over the back of their booth, completely mesmerized. A dishwasher had poked his head out of the swinging kitchen doors, drying his hands on a towel, his mouth slightly open in surprise. Even Mr. Harrison stopped fidgeting. He sat there, arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched. He was staring at Anna, but he wasn't seeing a waitress anymore. He was seeing a woman who was clearly in her element, a woman who had a depth he couldn't understand and a talent he couldn't buy. He tried to hold onto his anger, but it was slipping away, replaced by a grudging, sour sense of awe. He had tried to shame her, to expose her as a fraud, but instead, she was exposing his own pettiness. The music began to slow down. The frantic energy dissipated, melting back into the gentle, rolling rhythm of the opening. Anna's hands softened their touch. The notes became lighter, drifting down like snowflakes. She played the final flourish, a delicate run that seemed to hang in the air for a heartbeat before resolving into the deep, resonant final chord. She held the chord, letting the sound vibrate through the bench and into the floor. She kept her hands on the keys, her head bowed slightly. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the awkward silence of embarrassment, it was the heavy, respectful silence that follows a great performance. No one moved. No one spoke. The air seemed to shimmer with the fading echoes of the music. Then, slowly, Anna lifted her hands from the keys. She took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling, and opened her eyes. The spell broke, but the world had changed. She wasn't just tired anymore, she was awake. She felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years: pride. She knew she couldn't sit there forever. She had a job to do. But as she prepared to stand up and face the room, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had proven something to herself, regardless of what Mr. Harrison thought. She touched the cold plastic of the piano keys one last time, a silent goodbye, and turned around to face the audience she never asked for. The silence stretched out, heavy and waiting, like the air right after a thunderstorm. It was the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. Anna sat on the bench for a moment longer, her hands resting lightly in her lap. She could feel the heat in her cheeks, a flush that had nothing to do with the heat of the kitchen or the running around she had been doing all day. It was the adrenaline of having let something real out into the world. She slowly turned around on the bench to face the room. For a second, she felt exposed. She had just poured her heart out in front of a room full of strangers, led there by a man who wanted to make a joke of her. She braced herself for the worst. She expected Mr. Harrison to laugh. She expected him to say something like, "See, I told you she could play a tune," reducing her moment back to a party trick. But that didn't happen. Instead, the sound started from the back. It was just one person at first, clapping slowly, deliberately. It was the young man in the hoodie who had been ignoring his phone. He didn't smile or cheer, he just nodded at her, a look of serious respect on his face. Then, the elderly woman near the window joined in, clapping her frail hands together. Within seconds, the sound swept through the room like a wave. It wasn't the polite, scattered clapping you hear when someone drops a plate and everyone is just glad it didn't break. This was loud, genuine applause. The kind that makes your ears ring. The man who ran the sandwich shop came out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron, a huge grin on his face. Even the dishwasher was still standing in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame, applauding with a towel slung over his shoulder. Anna looked at them, really seeing them for the first time, not as customers or tables to be cleared, but as people. She felt a lump form in her throat, threatening to choke her. She hadn't played for an audience in 2 years. She forgot how much it connected her to humanity. Then, she shifted her gaze to the corner booth. Mr. Harrison. He was not clapping. In fact, he looked smaller than he had when she walked over to his table. His arms were still crossed over his chest, but his posture was stiff. His face was a mask of confusion and annoyance. He was looking around the room, glaring at the clapping patrons as if they were traitors. He didn't understand why they were clapping for the help. To him, nothing had changed. She was still just the girl who brought him coffee, no matter what noise she had made on the dusty instrument. Anna watched him for a moment. She realized then that he would never get it. He lived in a world where things were only valuable if they had a price tag or a status attached to them. Pure emotion, Raw talent given freely meant nothing to him because he couldn't own it. She stood up from the bench. Her legs felt a little shaky, like jelly, but she held her head high. She walked back toward the main floor, passing by the tables where people were still smiling at her, some murmuring bravo or beautiful. A teenage girl reached out and high-fived her as she walked by. Anna couldn't help it, a small, genuine smile broke through her tired mask. It felt foreign on her face, stretching muscles that hadn't been used in a long time. She reached Mr. Harrison's booth. The applause was dying down now, settling back into a murmur of conversation, but the energy in the room was completely different. The heaviness was gone. The air felt lighter. Mr. Harrison looked up at her, his face turning a shade of red that clashed with his expensive tie. He wanted to say something cutting. He wanted to regain control of the situation. But the words seemed to stick in his throat. He looked at the woman standing before him, expecting her to be timid, waiting for a reprimand. But she wasn't looking down. She was looking him right in the eye. There was a strength there that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. Well, he finally managed to sputter, clearing his throat awkwardly. I suppose that was adequate. For a diner. The words were weak, even to his own ears. They sounded hollow and petty. He tried to sneer, but it came out as a grimace. Anna didn't look away. She didn't nod submissively. She just looked at him with a calmness that unnerved him. It was the look you give a child who is throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. It was a look of pity. "Is there anything else you need, sir?" she asked. Her voice wasn't servile anymore. It was flat, professional, but it carried a new weight. She wasn't asking because she was afraid of him. She was asking because it was her job, and she was done letting his attitude dictate her self-worth. Mr. Harrison fumbled with his napkin, unfolding it and refolding it nervously. "No," he snapped. "Nothing else. Just the check." "Of course," Anna said softly. She turned and walked away to get the ticket. As she walked behind the counter, she could feel the eyes of the other customers on her. They were watching her with a sense of solidarity. It was a strange feeling. Usually, when a customer was rude to a server, other customers just ignored it, not wanting to get involved or ruin their own meals. But today, the music had changed the rules. Anna had stood up to him, not with words, but with excellence, and it had rallied the room. When she returned with the small black folder containing the bill, she placed it on the table without a sound. Mr. Harrison didn't look at it. He was busy adjusting his watch, avoiding her eyes. The power dynamic had flipped so violently that he didn't know how to handle it. He had come in feeling like a king, and now he felt like the court jester. She left him to deal with it. She went back to table 4, where the ketchup bottle was still sticky. She picked up her rag and started wiping the table again. It felt strange to go back to such a mundane task after such a high emotional peak. But as she wiped the stickiness away, she realized that the table was just a table. The ketchup was just ketchup. She was still tired, her feet still hurt, and the bills were still waiting at home. But the weight on her chest was gone. The diner began to buzz again, but it was a different kind of buzz. People were talking to each other, not just on their phones. They were talking about the music. They were talking about how the afternoon had turned into something unexpected. The manager came over to her while she was refilling the sugar caddies. He didn't say anything about playing on company time or leaving her station. He just looked at her with a mix of wonder and apology. "You really can play, huh?" he asked, scratching the back of his neck. Yeah, Anna said, placing the sugar jar down gently. I really can. You should, you know, tell us next time, he mumbled, feeling bad about how he had let Mr. Harrison push her around. We could put it on the schedule or something. Anna smiled a small, private smile. Maybe, she said. But today was just enough. She glanced over at the corner booth. Mr. Harrison had thrown a handful of bills onto the table, not a generous tip, just enough to cover the check. He was standing up, adjusting his jacket. He looked uncomfortable in his own skin. He wanted to leave, to escape a room where he wasn't the most important person in it. He was leaving with his dignity a little bruised, while Anna, the waitress he tried to shame, was standing tall amidst the clatter of the dishes, the quiet hero of the afternoon. She watched him walk toward the exit, his footsteps sharp against the floor, trying to maintain an air of importance that no one believed anymore. As the heavy glass door swung shut behind him, the diner seemed to take a deep breath and relax. Anna picked up her coffee pot and moved on to the next table, her hands steady, her heart full, ready to finish her shift. The heavy glass door swung shut behind Mr. Harrison, effectively cutting him off from the world he had tried so hard to dominate. The diner let out a collective breath that seemed to rattle the windows. It was as if the entire room had been holding its breath, waiting for the storm to pass, and now that it had, the atmosphere was completely different. Anna stood by the coffee station for a moment, watching the space where he had just been. She expected to feel angry. She expected to feel humiliated that he had treated her like a toy he could play with. But surprisingly, she didn't feel either of those things. She felt light. The heavy, gray fog that seemed to hang over her life for the past 2 years had lifted, if only for a moment. She realized that the shame wasn't hers to carry. It was his. He was the one who had made a fool of himself in front of a room full of people. He was the one who looked small. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly, the aftermath of the adrenaline rush. Her fingers felt stiff, but in a good way, like they had just woken up from a long sleep. She flexed them, feeling the muscles in her palms protest. It had been a long time since she had played with that much intensity. She worried for a second that she might have hurt her hands, which she needed for work, but she pushed the thought away. It was worth it. Hey, a voice said softly from behind her. Anna turned around to see the elderly woman from the window table standing there. She was small and frail, clutching a worn handbag, but her eyes were sharp and bright. She held out a $10 bill to Anna. It was crisp, contrasting with the wrinkled skin of her hand. You play beautifully, the woman said, her voice raspy but warm. I haven't heard that piece played with that much soul since, well, since I can't remember. Anna felt the blush rising in her cheeks again. She reached out to take the bill, but the woman insisted on pressing it into her palm. No, please, the woman said, closing Anna's fingers over the money. You take that. Don't let the world silence you, young lady. That man, the one who just left, he has no music in him. You have enough for both of you. Tears pricked at the corners of Anna's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to cry at work. Thank you, she whispered. That really means a lot. The woman patted her hand and turned to leave, but before she did, she looked back at the piano in the corner. You should play more often. It changes the air in here. Anna stood there for a moment, clutching the $10 bill. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation. It was the recognition that she wasn't invisible. She tucked the bill into her apron pocket, right next to the few crumpled dollars she had earned earlier. They felt like different currency now. She turned back to her tables, but the dynamic had shifted entirely. As she walked by the booth with the two business women, they stopped talking. One of them looked up, her expression serious. "Was that Chopin?" the woman asked. Anna nodded, surprised. "Yes. Opus 9, number 2. I used to play when I was a girl," the woman said, a faraway look in her eyes. "I haven't touched a piano in 30 years. Hearing you play, it made me miss it. It made me remember who I used to be." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. "I run a foundation downtown. We do charity galas, boring stuff mostly. But we are looking for entertainment for the winter gala. I don't suppose you'd be interested in auditioning. It pays well." Anna stared at the card. It was heavy, creamy paper with gold lettering. For a second, she felt dizzy. This was what she had always wanted. Opportunities. Connections. A chance to use her talent for something more than just passing time. I don't have my own instrument anymore," Anna stammered. "And I'm a bit rusty." The woman smiled, a genuine, friendly smile. "Everyone is rusty at first. But you have something you can't teach. You have feeling. Call me. Even if you don't want the gig, maybe we can help you find a piano to practice on." Anna took the card, her fingers trembling again. This time it wasn't just adrenaline, it was hope. It was a tiny, flickering candle in the dark. "I will," she said. "Thank you." She moved away from the table, her mind spinning. She felt like she was walking on air. As she walked past the table where the young man in the hoodie had been sitting, she saw he had already left. But on the table, under his empty plate, there was a folded piece of notebook paper. Anna cleared the plate and unfolded the paper. It was a sketch. It was a drawing of her at the piano, done in quick, charcoal strokes. It captured her with her head bowed, her hands arched over the keys. It wasn't just a picture, it captured the emotion. It looked like she was praying. Underneath the drawing, he had written in messy handwriting, "You made the silence loud today. Thanks." Anna held the paper for a long time. It was strange how one act of vulnerability could ripple out and touch so many people. She had thought she was just fighting back against a bully, but she had actually given something to everyone in that room. She had given them a moment of beauty in the middle of an ordinary, messy afternoon. The manager came out of the kitchen again, looking around the bustling diner. The lunch rush was starting to pick up, the phone was ringing off the hook, and the busboy was scrambling to clean tables. But the mood was lighter. The customers were chatting, laughing, even the grumpy guy in the corner who usually complained about the ice was reading his paper in peace. The manager caught Anna's eye. He gestured toward the piano. "Hey, leave the menus off for now, will you?" Anna looked at him, confused. "You want me to put the flowers back?" "No," he said, looking a bit embarrassed. "Leave it open. It looks nice. It makes the place look classy. Like a real joint." He shuffled away before she could reply, going to yell at the cook about an order of fries. Anna smiled. She looked at the piano. It sat there, silent and empty, the keys yellowed and chipped. But it didn't look like a piece of junk anymore. It looked like a stage. She walked over to the counter to pour more coffee for a new customer who had just sat down. The customer, a man in a delivery uniform, looked up at her. Did I hear piano music a minute ago? He asked. I thought I was hallucinating. I thought I walked into a movie. You didn't hallucinate, Anna said, pouring the black coffee with a steady hand. We had a guest performer. She was good, the man said. Really good. Made me wish I wasn't in such a hurry. Anna looked around the room. She realized that the uniform she wore, the apron, the non-slip shoes, the tired eyes didn't define her. It was just what she wore to pay the bills. Inside, she was still the girl who loved music. And today, she proved that she didn't have to choose between being a worker and being an artist. She could be both. The tension that had been knotting her shoulders all day finally unraveled. She rolled her neck, hearing a satisfying crack. Her feet still hurt, and she knew she had a mountain of dishes to wash later, but the weight was gone. The shame was gone. She had taken a moment meant to humiliate her and turned it into a triumph. She grabbed her rag and headed toward a table that needed wiping, but there was a spring in her step that hadn't been there when the shift started. The diner was noisy again, the clatter of plates and the roar of conversation returning to normal volume. But underneath it all, Anna could still hear the music. It was playing in her head, a quiet, steady reminder that she was still here, she was still talented, and she was still worth listening to. The man had tried to break her spirit, but instead, he had accidentally handed her the keys to unlock it again. And she wasn't about to let them go. The afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the diner floor. The rush of customers had finally slowed down, replaced by the quiet hum of the cleaning crew and the rhythmic ding of the dishwasher in the back. Anna leaned against the counter, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. She was physically exhausted, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones, but her mind was racing with a strange, electric energy. She pulled the business card out of her apron pocket for the 10th time. She ran her thumb over the raised gold lettering. It felt unreal. For 2 years, she had been telling herself that her past life as a musician was dead, that she had failed and moved on to real life. But in the span of 5 minutes, that lie had been shattered. She wasn't a failure, she was just paused. The manager, a guy named Dave who usually just worried about the bottom line, walked by and stopped. He looked at the card in her hand, then up at her face. You gonna call her? He asked, trying to sound casual but failing to hide his curiosity. Anna looked up, startled. I don't know. I mean, look at me, Dave. I haven't played a real gig in years. I don't even have a nice dress to wear to a gala. I'm a waitress. Dave sighed and leaned against the counter next to her. He crossed his arms, looking out at the empty tables. You know, my wife used to love to paint, he said out of nowhere. She was pretty good, too. But then we had the kids, and money got tight, and she put the brushes away. They're still in a box in the attic somewhere. Every time she goes up there, she comes down sad. He turned to look at Anna. Don't put yourself in a box in the attic, Anna. You're too good to just collect dust. Anna looked at him, surprised by the depth of his words. Dave wasn't usually the philosophical type. Thanks, Dave, she said softly. Don't mention it, he grunted, pushing himself off the counter. But seriously, if you get the gig, you have to promise to play here once a month. It's great for business. People are still talking about it. He walked away, shouting an order to the busboy. Anna chuckled. She slipped the card back into her pocket, right next to the sketch the young man had left. She thought about the woman's foundation, about the potential to play again. But more importantly, she thought about how she felt sitting at that piano. She felt like herself. Not a version of herself filtered through someone else's expectations, but her true self. She walked over to the corner of the room where the piano sat. The vase of plastic flowers was still on the floor where she had left it. She picked it up and set it on a nearby table, out of the way. Then, she sat down on the bench again. It was quiet now, the dinner crowd not yet arrived. She rested her fingers on the keys, feeling the cool plastic again. She didn't play a song this time. She just played a single chord. A C major chord. It rang out clear and simple, filling the empty space. It was a happy sound. It was a sound of beginning. She remembered the look on Mr. Harrison's face when he left. He had looked defeated, but he had also looked confused. He couldn't understand why his power trip hadn't worked. He couldn't understand why playing a game of Humiliate the Waitress had ended up being his own loss. She realized then that people like him feed on insecurity. They need you to believe you are small so they can feel big. When she stopped believing she was small, his power over her vanished. Anna took a deep breath. She wasn't going to quit her job tomorrow. She still had bills to pay, and the rent wasn't going to magically disappear. She would still have to deal with rude customers and long shifts. But the difference was, she wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to see herself as just a waitress who used to be something. She was a musician who currently waited tables. There was a big difference between the two. She stood up and grabbed the cleaning spray and a rag from under the bar. She started to wipe down the keys of the piano, something she was sure hadn't been done in years. The black keys came away clean, the white ones lost their sticky residue. It was a small act of care, a way of respecting the instrument and the part of herself that lived inside it. As she wiped, she made a decision. She was going to call the number on the card. She was going to scrape together the money to rent a practice space for an hour a week. She was going to get her old sheet music out of storage. It wasn't going to be easy, and she might fall on her face, but at least she would be moving. The front bell jingled, signaling a new customer. Anna turned, expecting another rush, but instead, she saw the older woman from earlier standing in the doorway. She had forgotten her gloves. Anna walked over to the table where she had been sitting. Sure enough, a pair of knit gloves were lying on the seat. She grabbed them and hurried to the door. "Excuse me, ma'am," Anna called out, stepping into the cool evening air. The woman turned and smiled when she saw the gloves. "Oh, thank you, dear. I am so forgetful these days." Anna handed them to her. "I was glad you came back," Anna said. "I wanted to tell you. I'm going to call you." "About the audition." The woman's eyes lit up. She reached out and squeezed Anna's hand. "I knew you would," she said. "I could hear it in your playing." "You're not done yet, Anna." "I hope not," Anna replied. "Music is a funny thing," the woman said, pulling on her gloves. "It hides when you chase it, but it comes back when you invite it in. That man today, he tried to chase it out of you, but you invited it back. That's a gift. Don't waste it." With a final nod, the woman turned and walked down the street, disappearing into the fading light. Anna stood in the open doorway for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over her face. She looked back into the diner. It looked different now. It wasn't just a place of work, it was a place where something had changed. It was the place where she remembered who she was. She walked back inside and tied her apron strings a little tighter. The shift was ending soon, but she didn't feel the usual dread of going home to an empty apartment. She had the sketch in her pocket, the card in her purse, and the sound of the music in her ears. She had stood up to a bully, not with anger, but with excellence. And that was a victory that no one could take away from her. The dinner crowd started to trickle in. A young couple sat in the booth where Mr. Harrison had caused all the trouble. They were laughing, holding hands across the table. The air was clear. The negativity had been flushed out, replaced by a lingering sense of possibility. Anna walked up to their table, pad in hand. "Hi there," she said, her voice steady and warm. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" They looked up at her and smiled. The pianist in the corner might have been silent for now, covered in menus and silence, but the music was still playing. It was playing in Anna's heart, and that was all that really mattered. She was ready for whatever came next, one note at a time.